In front of the class, the calculus teacher made a jest by pointing to the janitor. However, the man's unexpected solution to the issue not only silenced the room, but also altered the perception of him by the entire school. He discreetly approached the board and resolved the issue exceeding all expectations. Eisenberg High School in Elkhart, Indiana, was in its fourth period on a Thursday, the type of day in which students focused more on the clock than the board, sharp-tongued, impatient, and always fast with sarcasm. Mr. Braddock, the calculus teacher at the school, had a reputation. He was not particularly favored, but he was not despised either. He was simply tolerated. The atmosphere of the classroom was arid. The whiteboard was adorned with equations. There was a faint aroma of eraser dust and worn-out footwear in the air. Phones were concealed beneath desks, with some pretended to be attentive while others gazed out the window. Then, an event occurred that would cause the atmosphere to shift abruptly, akin to a sudden gust of wind. A faint squeak echoed from the hallway as Mr. Braddock scrawled another derivative on the board. The janitor was present, mopping the area outside the classroom in his customary consistent sluggish pace. Braddock halted in the middle of his sentence, averted his gaze to the door, and forced a half-smile. He suddenly turned to the class and pointed toward the hallway, without any prior notification. "Well, observe who is present. Dear Mr. Dorsey, tell me, do you believe you have the ability to resolve this issue?" He used the back of his marker to tap the board, as if he were issuing a challenge on a game show. Laughter ensued. It is not a booming noise, rather it is the type that causes you to sway in your seat due to uncertainty about its appropriateness. For the second time, Mr. Braddock grinned. "Come on, Lamar, you consistently appear to be preoccupied with an issue." Lamar Dorsey, the 52-year-old custodian, stood in the hallway with his mop in hand. He consistently donned the same forest green uniform, which was spotless but faded, and was adorned with the letter L. Over his chest pocket, Dorsey was inscribed. He did not flinch, refused to recoil. He merely gazed into the chamber. Gradually he entered the room. The broom was propped against the wall. A few students sat more upright. There were those who believed that he was about to utter a clever remark and depart. It is possible that he would either make a jest or simply depart. However, he refrained from doing so. Rather, Lamar proceeded to the front of the chamber. "Do you mind?" he inquired in a composed manner, indicating toward the board. Braddock raised his eyebrows. "I would like to extend an invitation to you." A few phones were silently extracted from luggage. One of the girls murmured, "Is he being sincere?" However, Lamar was not impeded by anyone. He paused after picking up the marker and examining the equation, not out of hesitation, but rather as if he was contemplating the matter profoundly, similar to someone who was reading a familiar map. He commenced writing with a minor squint. Absence of theatrics. No flair, just deliberate strokes, one line after another. The room descended into an unsettling silence. The sole sounds were the groaning of a chair, as someone leaned forward, and the marker on the whiteboard. Mr. Braddock attentively observed as he crossed his arms. His jaw tightened, but his expression remained unchanged. Lamar's voice was low and meticulous as he articulated the steps aloud. "Do you see this? A chain rule problem is presented below. However, the initial step is to identify the internal function. After isolating that, the situation becomes significantly more organized." He moved as if he had done this before, not only with regard to the issue, but also with regard to the instruction. The tone of his voice was neither arrogant nor showy. He provided a straightforward and unambiguous explanation. It was as though he had dedicated more time to teaching than to mopping. He capped the marker and stepped back when he was finished. The board was replete with meticulous, well-organized work. He then turned to Braddock, and then to the class. "That is one approach," he stated, and for a brief period, no one moved. One of the juniors in the back whispered, "He got it right." Mr. Braddock did not utter a single syllable, not immediately. Nothing emerged from his mouth, despite a minor opening. The silence became more resonant than any jest he could have concocted. Lamar walked back to the door, picked up his mop, and nodded politely. There was no acclaim. There is no conceit, just that serene confidence, as if he had not just turned the room upside down. However, as Lamar reached for the chalk, no one anticipated the subsequent events. For an entire 10 seconds, no one moved. It appeared as though the class had been abruptly roused from a dream and thrust into the realm of reality. The type of situation that is inappropriate for a high school classroom. Lamar Dorsey, Mr. They had always referred to him as Dorsey in passing, and he was halfway out the door when someone said it aloud. Wait, did he just do that in his head? Wes Hanley, a senior in the front row, typically avoided conversation, unless it was related to his grades. He was not teasing. His pupils were wide open. He glanced at the board once more, as if the answer had changed while he was blinking. Braddock ultimately articulated his thoughts. He spoke with a bland tone that bordered on irritation. Well, he got the correct answer. However, his tone was devoid of the customary sarcasm. There was an additional item that had been introduced, something more akin to perplexity, or even worse, discomfort. Lamar cast a look in the opposite direction. He stated, "I spent a significant amount of time with numbers in the past." He then gave a slight shrug. They never departed. A small number of students found it amusing. It was not directed at him this time. Rather, it was due to the escalating tension. Lamar did not await a response. He departed with a mop in his hand, his shoes squeaking gently as he made his way down the hallway. As if nothing had transpired. It was as though he had not just solved a college-level problem in under 3 minutes without the use of a calculator. The phones were introduced at that time. Carly Benson, a junior, was situated in the third row, and had captured the entire event on video. She had already begun editing the recording prior to the bell ringing. It was the sole topic of conversation in the hallway during the interval between classes. "Did you observe Mr. Dorsey? What is Braddock's appearance?" His appearance suggested that an individual had disconnected him. From where did he acquire that knowledge? I believed that he was merely responsible for cleaning the floors. The video had been uploaded to TikTok by lunchtime. Afterward, Instagram was implemented. It lacked refinement. Lamar's hands were seen moving across the board in a shaky angle, and a voice in the background murmured, "Yo, he's solving it." The caption read, "The calculus teacher was recently inhaled by our janitor." A few individuals laughed. A few individuals gazed. However, the craze continued to intensify. The teacher's lounge was not significantly quieter. "You are informing me that he performed a full derivative chain problem in his mind?" Miss Lin, the physics instructor, inquired. She was in the process of biting into her sandwich, but she had ceased chomping. Mr. Crane, the English instructor, murmured, "He did. I did not utilize notes. Did not even hesitate. It was akin to muscle memory." Braddock pretended to grade papers at the corner table. He refrained from uttering any words. But Principal Everett did. "He has resided here for 6 years. No one ever mentioned that he had an academic background." Individuals shook their heads. There was a general lack of knowledge regarding Lamar. He arrived early and departed late. Cleanliness was consistently maintained on the floors. No light source ever failed to operate for more than a day. The individual labored in complete stillness. However, he was no longer merely the individual responsible for the broom. A group of students awaited outside the janitor's closet in the corridor. Refrain from lodging grievances regarding spills. Alternatively, request a duster. They merely desired to converse with him. A 12-year-old boy, who was holding his geometry book, inquired, "Do you tutor, Mr. Dorsey?" Lamar blinks. "I have not done so in an extended period." The child stated, "You ought to." That was quite impressive. Lamar laughed. However, the tone was not dismissive. Rather, it was unexpected. Braddock's disposition was markedly altered during the third period the following day. He refrained from making quips. He did not contact anyone at random. "See," he instructed with his gaze fixed on the board, and a more subdued tone than is customary. It was not explicitly stated by anyone. However, it was observed by all. Wes approached him after class. "Mr. Braddock, that incident with Mr. Dorsey yesterday. He implemented the identical methodology that you demonstrated to us last week. Is the chain rule correct?" Braddock nodded once. "Correct. Only, he elucidated it more effectively." Braddock declined to respond. However, it was not the solution that truly astounded them. It was the statement made by Lamar subsequent to the event. Lamar Dorsey had not intended to create a commotion. He has never enjoyed being the center of attention, not even when he was young. Consequently, he experienced a sense of disorientation when students began to gather by the maintenance closet to converse. or when instructors directed long glances at him in the hallways. He maintained a low profile and proceeded with his customary duties, which included replenishing paper towels, repairing a faulty faucet in the boys' locker room, and wiping down the cafeteria tables. However, he could sense the change, a shift in the way people viewed him, as if they were attempting to conform him to a new image they were unaware existed.
It was not merely fascination, it was a state of confusion.
Showing respect, perhaps regret. Additionally, it caused him to feel apprehensive. Principal Everett requested that he visit the front office that afternoon. He entered the building while still wearing his gloves, his uniform slightly damp from the cleaning process under the cafeteria basins. In a gesture of respect, he removed his headwear. Everett's hands were clasped as he bent forward in his chair. "Lamar, may I inquire about something? Do you have a foundation in engineering or education?" Lamar hesitated. He briefly glanced downward, as if he were dusting off an old aspect of himself that he had not visited in years. "I attended Purdue University," he stated quietly. "Mechanical engineering. Complete transportation." The principal's eyebrows were raised as he reclined back. "Are you for real?" Lamar replied, "Was. I had plans." The situation became more complex. For the first time in a long time, he recounted the narrative. He had been raised in Gary, Indiana, a bright child who has always been fascinated by the mechanics of objects. Anything that he could disassemble and reassemble, including motors and pulleys. His mother, Estelle, independently nurtured him and his two sisters.
She was able to read to them every night.
Despite working overtime at a textile facility, she was convinced that education was the sole viable alternative. She used to say, "Books come first, always. The world will attempt to close the door. However, they are unable to prevent you from entering if you possess your own key." Lamar acquired that key. Valedictorian, state science competition champion. Afterward, the scholarship to Purdue was awarded. He was already instructing his peers during his freshman year. His name was noted on the attendance record, and the professors took note. However, during his sophomore year, he received a telephone call that fundamentally altered his life. His mother had collapsed while at work. The diagnosis was late-stage malignancy, according to the physicians. Lamar was scarcely able to maintain her alertness by the time she arrived at the hospital. She murmured, "I can handle it. Please refrain from returning home."
He did not pay attention.
He took a semester off, then another. He pursued employment opportunities, including warehouse work and night duties at a grocery store, in order to meet his financial obligations. Classes receded into the background. The dream followed suit. Numerous items were dispersed by the time his mother passed away. There was no residence for him to return to, no money to complete his degree, and no guidance counselor to inquire about his absence. Lamar informed Everett, "I was convinced that I would return to school. However, circumstances ensued. Life does not wait for you." The principal maintained a posture of silence. The narrative was substantial. Do not be overly dramatic, simply be genuine. The type of life that is never discussed unless you inquire. Lamar stored his transcripts in a box beneath his bed, along with a weathered Purdue sweatshirt, an antiquated calculator, and a photograph of him and his mother on orientation day. He never handled it, nor did he dispose of it. All of this was now being brought back into the light. He sat on the back steps of his modest apartment complex that evening. The sky was dim, and the only sound was the murmur of distant traffic. He gazed ahead as he drank tea from a metal thermos. He had not contemplated calculus in years. He has not worked since the last tutoring position he secured prior to his withdrawal. And now, it was back, as if an old friend were pounding on his door. However, a single decision would undermine all of the careful work he had put in. Lamar had established a commitment to himself during his college years. He would take a brief respite, re-establish his family, and then conclude his studies with a bang. However, life did not conform to plans, particularly those that were founded solely on hope. Lamar returned to Gary after his mother's passing, endeavoring to reconstruct the events. His sisters were still in high school, and were scarcely able to make ends meet. The counter was cluttered with bills. Rent was requested by the proprietor. Additionally,
No one from Purdue contacted him to inquire about his whereabouts. He accepted any position that was available to him, including overnight security at a cargo yard, janitor at a strip mall, and stockroom loader. Anything that generated sufficient revenue to maintain the electricity supply. Schools continued to recede into the past. Initially, he would periodically contact the university to inquire about the possibility of transferring credits or reapplying. They would transmit forms, he would complete them, but he never sent them. There was always an obstruction. Then the breaking point occurred. It was the latter part of November. Frank Booker, the proprietor of a flooring company in South Bend, had extended an offer of employment to Lamar. "You possess sharp intelligence," he stated. "Do not squander your time pushing brooms. I will personally instruct you." Lamar experienced renewed optimism, a genuine opportunity. However, Alana, his youngest sibling, was involved in a fight at school the day before he was scheduled to commence. A foolish argument that became increasingly heated. She had fractured the cranium of an individual. They issued a threat to remove her. Lamar was required to attend. No one else would appear for her. Therefore, he was unable to attend his initial day of employment at the flooring company. Someone else was granted the position by Frank. That concluded the matter. A door that had the potential to be unveiled slammed close. He ceased to pursue his ambitions after that, and instead pursued stability. Years passed in a blur, from one community to another, job to job. He never maintained a record. "I was never involved in any sort of conflict. I have just managed to subsist in silence." When he arrived in Elkhart in his early 40s, he was not seeking a new beginning. Rather, he desired a consistent income. Benefits were provided by the education district. The summers were calm. Without hesitation, he accepted the position of custodian. He appreciated it in his own unique manner. Predictable, well organized. Students abandoned him. Teachers beamed with a polite demeanor. He did not anticipate any form of rapport or connection. He did not require it. He remained silent, sanitized the wreckage, and departed before the final bell tolled. However, numbers were never far from his mind. He would occasionally look at the board after passing a math class, see a formula, and mentally complete it. It was comparable to muscle memory, a component of him that maintained its sharpness, even as other aspects of his life were obscured by routine. He would return home, prepare a quiet meal consisting of grilled fish, brown rice, and perhaps some vegetables, and peruse an antiquated engineering book that he kept concealed behind the cereal boxes. To determine whether it was still in his possession, he consistently executed this action. Until Mr. Braddock summoned him that day, he had never considered it necessary to demonstrate it.
Subsequently, circumstances were evolving, not only at school, but also within him. He pondered the children who congregated outside his supply closet, posing inquiries. "I considered the possibility of Wes Hanley visiting that morning with a folded piece of paper and expressing, 'Mr. Dorsey, I attempted to resolve that same issue. Would you be able to verify it for me?' Lamar had gently, meticulously. He clarified the error that Wes had made, without causing him to feel embarrassed. Wes smiled upon finally comprehending the situation, not out of conceit, but out of a sense of being connected. You kept in mind that type of thing. However, not everyone was overjoyed. Braddock, for instance, had become silent. It is excessively silent. Students observed. Educators observed. There was something about being introduced to your class by a man you had never given a second thought to that frightened him. He refrained from expressing his anger, however, his tone became increasingly terse. His forbearance was diminishing. Additionally, when Lamar was mentioned in the lounge, he abruptly shifted the conversation. He was not accustomed to being outshone, particularly by an individual who had been invisible to him until this moment. However, fate had one more surprise in store. Additionally, this one immediately prompted him to return to mathematics. The video did not merely circulate within Eisenberg High. It also exited the premises. The beginning was modest. The caption was reposted by a student page in the area. "When your janitor proves to be more intelligent than your teacher." Subsequently, it was posted on a regional education forum. It had traversed state lines by the weekend. Individuals on the internet were astounded by the news. They were not making fun of Lamar. They were astounded. A man deconstructed it more effectively than my college professor. Please provide this man with a classroom and a chalkboard, not a mop. Proof that you are never privy to another individual's narrative. Lamar was unaware of the events that transpired by Monday morning. He refrained from adhering to social media platforms. He continued to possess a mobile phone. The initial task he performed upon his arrival at work was to repair a paper towel dispenser that was obstructed in the girls' restroom, as he consistently did on Mondays. However, something seemed to be amiss. When he passed by, the teachers temporarily suspended their discussions. Students nodded, not out of obligation, but with an unusual form of respect. A few individuals even beamed, as if they were witnessing him for the first time. One girl called out to him as he passed the library, "Hey, Mr. Dorsey, you are currently somewhat well known." Lamar's chuckle was gentle. "Be skeptical of all the information you encounter." Nevertheless, Wes Hanley was present with two other students when he rounded the corner. One was holding a calculus book that was open to a problem that was highlighted in pink. "Do you care to review this with us?" Wes inquired. Lamar gazed around in bewilderment. "Do you have a period of free time?" "We allocated time." In an instant, Lamar sat down on the floor with three adolescents and guided them through a multivariable equation in the midst of a hallway adorned with science fair posters and lockers. In a systematic manner, line by line. I am refraining from speaking to them, engaging in conversation with them. It did not generate deafening noises, was not overly showy. However, something significant was transpiring. Someone recorded it in the hallway. Lamar was not informed. That would not have been to his liking. Principal Everett was conversing with an individual from the local school board while returning to his office. Indeed, that is accurate. Lamar Dorsey has been with us for 6 years. He is not a member of the faculty. He serves as a custodian. He took a moment to listen. I would not describe it as unconventional. I would describe it as being disregarded. Braddock was concurrently perusing an email that had been relayed by a parent in the teacher's lounge. A hyperlink to the video that has since gone viral. There is no commentary. There is no subject text. Specifically, the hyperlink. Additionally, the phrase "I believed you would find this interesting." He shut down the laptop without observing it. Everett summoned Lamar back into the room that afternoon and extended an invitation to take a seat. Lamar maintained his position. The principal stated, "I have received a request from the board. They are inquiring as to whether you would be interested in directing an after-school tutoring program. Voluntary, small group, merely an experimental run." Lamar did not respond immediately. Everett further stated, "You would of course receive compensation. It is not about replacing your current role. Rather, it is about enhancing it, sharing what is evidently still in your possession." Lamar gazed down at his hands, which were clean, calloused and weathered. He stated, "I have not instructed in quite some time." Everett responded, "You have not ceased to be aware." Lamar gazed upward. The man's voice was devoid of any form of coercion. It was merely a straightforward invitation. "I will contemplate it." He retrieved the old cardboard box from beneath his bed that evening, which contained the Padua soy sweatshirt, the transcripts, and the orientation photo. He had not touched it in years. He arranged all of the items on the table. The words were still present, despite the fact that the paper had yellowed slightly and the edges had curled. That was the characteristic of knowledge. It did not diminish. It awaited. He was not concerned with the views or the comments, nor did he require virality. However, the knowledge that he could still make a difference was a source of discomfort. However, while some were astounded, others were less enthusiastic about his increasing popularity. The school began to undergo a transformation as Lamar garnered more attention. It originated with the children. The first to transition were those who used to pass him in the hall without a second glance. They now paused to greet him with a good morning. A small number of students even requested assistance with their assignments during the intervals between classes. By the conclusion of the second week, a small group of students had unofficially established what they referred to as Dorsey sessions. They would convene in the library, after school, their heads bowed, and their notebooks open, to listen as Lamar articulated concepts with a clarity that defied expectation, but was held in high regard by all. Subsequently, educators arrived. The majority of individuals were encouraging. Miss Lin, a physics student, was the first to visit the library and observe him interact with the students. She spoke gently. "You possess a gift. I am not referring to the use of numbers alone." However, not everyone was overjoyed. Braddock had refrained from discussing Lamar since the day it transpired. He conducted himself as though nothing had transpired in the teacher's lounge. However, the animosity was evident in his silences. He delivered sentences that were truncated. He never gazed directly at Lamar. Calculus was never addressed by him. Braddock expressed his satisfaction with the students' developing interest in mathematics during a parent-teacher meeting. "We should ensure that the distinction between instruction and inspiration is not muddled." On the surface, it appeared to be courteous. However, what was the underlying tone? It was heard by all. The principal did not tolerate the situation. One morning, he brought Braddock into his office and presented it in a straightforward manner. "I am aware that it was painful," Everett stated. "But Lamar did not cause you to feel embarrassed. He served as an inspiration to them." Braddock adjusted in his seat. "He lacks the necessary qualifications. We underestimated his level of education. And more importantly, he's reaching kids in a manner none of us have." Braddock initially opened his mouth, but subsequently shut it. There was nothing to say, not really. In the interim, Lamar adhered to his regimen. He declined to request a title. "I did not desire any special treatment." However, he accepted the principal's offer of a modest honorarium to maintain the tutoring sessions, not for the financial gain, but because it felt right. He began to carry a compact binder, pages of problems, blank workbooks, and notes that he had composed by hand were contained within. During breaks, he'd sit in the back corner of the cafeteria and scrawl down formulas from memory, occasionally nodding at a passing student who'd call out, "Hey Mr. D." Carly, the student who captured the original footage, encountered him at the vending machines one afternoon. She inquired, "Have you ever considered becoming a teacher?" Lamar hesitated before responding. "I desired to construct objects, maybe instruct at a later time." However, reality had other plans. "Well," she said, presenting him with a new mechanical pencil, "I believe you are currently engaged in both activities." He grinned. "Thank you." However, tension was developing beneath all of this good. The school had begun receiving calls from certain parents. The majority of individuals were encouraging. However, an anonymous complaint was submitted to the board. Is it permissible for a janitor to provide tutoring services to students in a school environment? Is he certified? Has he undergone a background check for instruction? Everett promptly resolved the matter. He is employed by the district. He has not committed any infractions. Additionally, had they genuinely been motivated by concern, they would have communicated with me directly. Lamar was never informed of the complaint. Nevertheless, Lamar could detect a presence in the air, not resentment, but resistance. It was as though certain individuals were uncertain as to where to situate him, as he did not neatly blend into the background. Then, one afternoon, Braddock performed an act that was entirely unexpected. During one of Lamar's tutoring sessions, he entered the library. As Lamar instructed a quartet of pupils regarding integrals, I observed him from a distance in silence. He advanced after approximately 10 minutes. "Do you object to my participation?" Braddock inquired. Lamar gazed upward. His expression remained unchanged. He inclined his head toward the chair. "As long as you are amenable to learning, just enough to brighten the atmosphere." The students laughed. Braddock grinned. For once it was not malicious. They sat together on that particular day, said only a few words. However, it was a beginning. However, Lamar was not particularly interested in titles. He had a different objective in view. The objective was no longer to establish any facts. Standing at the whiteboard in the library, with students assembled around, Lamar Dorsey's motivation was never about redemption or revenge. He was not attempting to impress anyone. He did not intend to be remembered. He was merely turning up for them. The children, individuals who served as a reminder of his juvenile self. The corner of the library was filled with chatter, questions, scribbled notes, and wide eyes every Tuesday and Thursday, immediately following the final bell, as Lamar guided students through math problems that they had previously dreaded. Not because he possessed all the answers, but because he convinced them that they could independently discover them. That is what has been retained. Isaiah, the freshman who nearly failed algebra last semester, was now solving quadratic equations without appearing to be in a state of distress. Additionally, Tasha, who previously harbored a deep-seated aversion to mathematics, is currently conducting mini-sessions for her cousins on the weekends, utilizing Lamar's notes. He never assumed the position of a traditional teacher, standing at the front. He conversed with them, asked them questions, and sat beside them before responding to their inquiries. Consequently, an increasing number of educators began to visit, not to superintend, rather to ascertain his methodology. Miss Lin inquired whether she could incorporate some of his explanations into her classroom. Coach Rivera inquired whether Lamar would be willing to assist in the establishment of a summer practice group for incoming freshmen. Braddock, who was hesitant and prideful, made frequent visits. Not on a daily basis, but frequently enough. He would discreetly provide an additional problem or two, and he eventually began to offer words of encouragement to the children. The sharpness of his voice had diminished. He had softened in some way. Braddock remained after the pupils had departed during a tutoring session on a particular day. "You know," he said, gazing at the board, "I used to believe that this position conferred significance upon me. I was empowered by that instruction." Lamar refrained from interfering. "However, you have served as a reminder of the fundamental nature of the matter, namely, the necessity of attendance, making it matter." Lamar simply bowed. Occasionally we all become disoriented. He did not harbor any resentments. It was unnecessary for him to do so. A month later, Principal Everett summoned him once more. A proposition was under consideration to formalize his sessions as an elective course for the upcoming semester. Not for credit, but for the purpose of enrichment, a conduit between students and their own self-assurance. Everett cautioned, "We will be required to navigate through certain obstacles. However, if you are amenable." Lamar gingerly shook his head. "I appreciate it," he said. "But I don't need the title. I'd rather keep it straightforward. Allow the children to attend solely on their own volition, rather than in accordance with a predetermined agenda." Everett acknowledged, "We will provide you with the assistance we can." Word of mouth extended beyond the confines of the school district. He was interviewed by a local reporter who visited him. Lamar maintained brevity. "There is no compelling narrative, absence of self-promotion. I am merely demonstrating the internal resources they possess," he stated. "Occasionally, it necessitates a brief period of time to perceive it." Eisenberg High's annual student exhibition was conducted in the spring. In a particular corner of the gymnasium, there was a booth named Dorsey's Table, as well as scientific projects, art displays, and choir performances. Student reflections on confidence, life and mathematics were presented. Lamar's ability to listen and believe in them was the reason why dozens of students had written about how he helped them see more of themselves, rather than because he provided answers. People no longer inquired, "Is he the janitor?" By the conclusion of the evening, they were murmuring, "That is Mr. Dorsey." He refrained from donning a suit. He did not deliver a speech. He stood by the table, smiled, and expressed gratitude to the pupils who visited. He retrieved the old Purdue sweatshirt from the crate beneath his bed later that evening. When he returned to his apartment, he refrained from donning it. He precisely folded it, deposited it in a new storage bin, and affixed a folder containing student thank you notes to its side. He came to the realization that legacy is not about titles. What you leave behind in others is the focus. He was not required to complete his education in order to become a teacher. He was not required to possess a degree in order to assume leadership. He merely had to demonstrate his presence, and demonstrate concern on a daily basis. And that is precisely what he intended to continue doing. I appreciate your willingness to hear Lamar's narrative. Subscribe and share it with someone who needs it if it moved you, if it reminded you of someone you've neglected, or someone who believed in you. Because occasionally, the most profound minds are concealed in the most obscure locations.